Hey everyone, and welcome to Read This Now, the weekly webcast where Brad Gustafson and I share two books that we love and we think you should read. When, Brad?
Right now. The feedback
There's a
from
delay.
the move was so strong last week. I just had to pull it out again. Which
I like
basically means my son really enjoyed it.
I love it. I think that's awesome. I don't know. I won't know what to do. Like every week, I anticipate not only what book you're going to share, but also what dance moves you're going to break out in the beginning. I'm like, it's one of my favorite parts of the week.
It's kind of like, I saw this on Twitter. Someone said, why do we all wave at the end of a Zoom call? Like we don't wave at the end of meetings in school or when we're, and I don't have the answer for that, but I always have this visceral urge to dance or do something to kick things off. I can't even suppress it. So thanks for tolerating it.
I encourage it more than tolerate. I celebrate and encourage it. It is awesome. Right. So what'd you read this week?
I got a really special book here, and so I know the author. I've met the author. I've actually had the pleasure of presenting with her. Her name is Dr. Joy, or her nickname. There's a story behind the story, and I think it's in the book too. But the picture book just came out, and I would venture to guess that for everyone working in schools or even in distance learning contexts, you've at some point in your career had a kiddo who has really struggled to regulate their emotions. And some of you may be, saying, not sometime. It's like, that's a real thing that happens sometimes with multiple kiddos in a year. And those situations get really extreme. The kiddos can, sometimes it's just, they're kind of anxious and hiding under a table. Other times they're maybe trying to throw the table, right? And it's scary for everyone. It's scary for the teacher. It's scary for the classmates. And I would venture to guess it's probably scary for the kiddo experiencing it. And I believe Dr. Joy has some personal experience with this, possibly with one of her kiddos, I think. And I won't get into like the dedication of the book and everything, but the story itself is about, it's called Getting Back to Zero. I'm sorry, Back to Zero. I should not add words in the title. Back to Zero by Dr. Joy. And it's a great book to read with a kiddo who's actually kind of just struggling, as they're getting close to coming down and needing help. But also, as everyone knows, it's good to read these books ahead of time, like proactively, right? When just to build the skills and the reflexes and things like that. But one of the reasons, in addition to this being super useful, like a book I could see every teacher and social worker and principal on the planet probably should have in their repertoire, just as to show empathy and representation to kiddos who are struggling, and maybe even the whole class, so that it can be talked about with dignity. And we all have our moments. But one of the things I really like is really a subtle thing in here. And the illustrator, it starts off where Dr. Joy worked with her illustrating team, and the kiddo, this is just my interpretation, and you and I have talked about this before. We kind of get to decide how we interpret the book and picture, and that's the beauty and peril of writing, right? But how I interpret it is sometimes when kids are feeling like this, or maybe even how their classmates are seeing them, it's not whole, or it's not a whole representation. It's almost like they're a shadow or a silhouette when they're in this really elevated state and struggling. And over the course of the book and near the end, the kiddo becomes whole as they're kind of working their way back to zero, hence the name of the story. And then at the end, you can just see like the complete person as they're thriving and more regulated, things like that. I just thought that was kind of a powerful, just a really subtle way to represent it, and maybe even a neat conversation starter with kiddos. So it's a picture book, and the pictures do a lot of the talking. It's simple text, but it's a powerful, important thing that we see all the time in schools. And I think the more resources and stories we have to connect to it and to be able to talk about it, the better for everyone. So I think you should read right now, Back to Zero by my friend and colleague, Dr. Joy.
I love it. That sounds really necessary. Sounds like a really necessary and important book. I was thinking as you were talking, and I could be getting this completely wrong, but because I'm not, and I've never studied as an artist or anything, but I think there's a term sometimes for that silhouetted or space that doesn't contain any content called negative space,
Mhm.
which gives the viewer the opportunity to fill it in themselves with whatever they perceive, which may be positive or negative. But also, if that really is the accurate term, I think sometimes we think of kids who are experiencing that kind of emotional trauma in a negative way. So I think it's really clever to depict them with negative space and then have it slowly be filled in. Now, I could be not have that term right, and then everything I've just said flies out the window. But I was thinking about that, and I thought that was very clever and interesting. Another layer to have of conversation if you were going to use that book maybe with some older kiddos.
Yeah, and I keyed in on one of many words that you just said, but when you said it's an important book, I think that's a great way to explain it. It's just a thing
Mm,
that's hard to talk about. It's hard to, we kind of punt in those situations, and
right.
having a variety of books to enter into conversation, not just to help a kiddo who might be struggling to regulate, but for classmates to talk about it too and develop some empathy.
For sure. And you mentioned being proactive, even if in your classroom setting you don't recognize any particular learners as having issues that could lead to that kind of shutdown or that kind of episode that feels violent or frightening or just out of control. You have no idea where any of the learners in your classroom might experience or bump up against that situation. So even sharing that book in a classroom setting where you don't feel like there's necessarily going to be a moment in your classroom where that might happen, you're helping prepare them and arm them with some strategies if it happens somewhere else. So I think that's great. I love that.
Right.
That's wonderful. Well,
Yeah,
Brad,
and I think it humanifies. That's not a word, but you know how I roll, right? It
human
helps
thighs.
people understand that emotions and feelings are real, and not it's not like good or bad, like 0 or 10,
Right.
you're a good or bad person, but it's like we all can be on a roller coaster at times, and the
Hmm.
important thing is to develop the language so that there's a tolerance, and classmates and educators are
Right.
looking at it with dignity and being like, okay, I can see that they're elevated. We've had the
Yes.
conversation ahead of time. How might I help? And maybe it's
Right.
just backing away a little bit. Maybe it's giving them a little grace when they're doing things that are really out of character. Maybe it's the proactive conversation where the teacher, because of this book and the conversations we had ahead of time, I, as a bystander, can come to grips with my feelings. Like, that scared me, and I didn't like it, and I don't know what to do now that everything kind of
Right.
seems normal, but yet that happened, and my teacher gave me permission to talk about that. It just can do so many things. So your word
Yeah.
important, was spot on.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that book
Yeah.
this week. In a cosmic way, as always, our journeys, our reading journeys are parallel in a way this week, as they always are, even though we don't plan it.
It's either
Um,
that or you're like the literacy seamstress where somehow you can salvage and tie and sew in and connect to anything I bring, good, bad, and otherwise. You find a way to transition. I'm actually starting to
you're
believe it's more of that, Jen, but
No, I see these connections whenever because Brad and I, we don't chat about this ahead of time. But once I listen to your book talk, I am always struck by the connective tissue. And maybe that has less to do with us being like cosmically aligned and more to do with this universal truths among kids and people that we can see in books.
yeah.
The reason we love books and share them so much, or at least one of them, is that the power of story as a connective tissue, both for healing and for growth. And so maybe that's that's probably the bigger part of it. But I also like to think it's just because we're BFFs and our
Yeah.
brains, we share the same brain. But this week, I also read a picture book, or chose a picture book to share this week. And it also gave me lots of inspiration about how it might be used in schools, especially during this particular time of year, where a lot of kiddos are going back to school in some form or fashion, whether it's remotely or in a face-to-face or some kind of hybrid version of that. And the book is, I'm going to go ahead and share the title because it's not one I can really save. It's called Your Name is a Song. And it is by Jamilah Thomkins-Bigelow. And it's the story of a young girl who, as the story opens up, she's coming out of school after the first day of school. And her mom is there to pick her up. And you can see them on the cover. And I'm going to point out the beautiful pattern in Mom's pants, because that actually is also the pattern in the end papers of the book, which I'll show in a minute. But when she comes out of school, she's upset. She's stomping. And Mom asks her what's wrong. And she says, that no one could pronounce my name. And that was a hurtful thing to her. And she uses the phrase that my name got stuck in my teacher's mouth. And what Mom says is, I'm going to read actually a section of it to you because it's just so sweet. She says, no one could pronounce my name. And Mama said, no one, not even your teacher? She tried. It got stuck in her mouth, the girl said. A street musician swayed and played. Mama closed her eyes until she swayed too. Tell your teacher your name is a song. The girl wrinkled her brows. I can't say that. Names aren't songs. Sure they are. Take the name Alumide. Alumide is a melody, girl, and so is Katone. The girl whispered the names, and tap, tap, tap went her feet. Mamadou is a beat. Tondawelu stretches out like a love song. And I want to show this because here's these beautiful illustrations of them on the street having this conversation, right? But look at what's so cool about this. As they go through and talk about different names on the way home, I want to point out that the author has included pronunciations. Okay. And it goes on, you can see them up here. And so you can take time to practice a name, you know, and to make sure and even sing it with your students so that they get to have the practice feeling of that name in their mouth so it doesn't get stuck. And all the way home, they practice these names and they sing a song related to it. And when the girl goes back to school the next day, she has a strategy she can share with her teacher about how to get that name unstuck from her mouth. And what I love is that at the end of the book, when her whole class is saying her name finally, and I'm not going to reveal her name here, she says it was music to her ears. And you can see her, how happy she is. But then right after is a glossary of all of the names in the book, and not only their pronunciation, but what their meaning is. And I find this to be, you know, we've talked about this before on this show. A person's name is personal. It was chosen for them. It takes on lots of meaning throughout their lives. When people mispronounce your name, even though it's unintentional, it can make you feel like you're different and other and not a good way. If people mispronounce it for a long period of time, it makes it feel as though they don't care about you enough to even learn your name. And so at the beginning of the school year, as you talked about with the other book, like this gives you permission to talk about your name, to help people know how to pronounce it. And even at the end of the book, she talks about how it's so important to tell someone, I'm struggling with your name. Can you help me learn it? Because I really want to. That just shows that level of commitment to knowing that person and wanting to be able to say their name, the name that was given to them apart from all others, to say it correctly. And so I just loved it. It's so beautiful. It's called Your Name is a Song, and it is by Jamilah Thomkins-Bigelow. And I think you should read it right now.
That was incredible. Maybe we should call this episode unofficially like the back to school special, or like, you know what I mean? The mini classroom library essentials.
Yes, I mean, there are some books that you share with just kids just because they're joyful and gorgeous or fun and they make kids giggle or you know, something. But then there are other books that you unpack because they give you a foundation upon which to have some conversations, and also to give kids tools for, you know, navigating the world, because understanding how someone's name is pronounced and being able to have a conversation about that is a skill they'll need their whole lives, not just in school.
Yeah, just the thing that kind of occurred to me as you were sharing is like us or one of us or an educator accidentally mispronouncing a kiddo's name or not learning it yet, or maybe not making the commitment to learn it after time. Yeah, it's a moment in time and it can leave an impact, but the sum total of lots of people doing that in a kiddo's life or in
Yes.
any human being's life, I mean, we don't get to see that. It's the same with bullying and other things. It's like we just see what we see, but imagine that times 10 or times 100 and the messages and like what that does.
Absolutely. And your name is such a like an important part of your identity. You know, it's what people call you like that. You hear your name hundreds and hundreds of times in a given day, and thousands, tens of thousands, even more during the course of your life. You know, it's such an important part of your identity. And so even if it's not intentional, the repeated mispronunciation of it can make you feel as though that piece of you is wrong somehow. It's difficult, it's a challenge for people, or that people don't care enough about you to take the time to practice. And that's really what it's all about. I heard someone say one time that there are no hard names, there are no difficult names, there are just unpracticed names. And so I've tried to change my language around that. Instead of saying, gosh, that name's hard for me to say, because then that makes the name itself seem negative in some way. I just say, gosh, I need to practice that one a little bit more. I'm not practiced enough. I need to practice that.
God, I would love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Like if we did bumpers on the show, that would be the bumper, the lead in. Like that was boom. Boom, Jen.
It's not mine. It's not mine. Well, listen, can I take a selfish moment to do another sort of like PSA, like public service announcement?
Bring it on.
Okay, so we haven't discussed this, so this might make Brad feel uncomfortable, but that's what I live for, is to make Brad antsy.
It takes a lot, so good luck.
But you know, in doing the research for this book, this show, meaning that I wanted to make sure I pronounced the author's name correctly. So I just went to YouTube and typed in the title of the book and the author so that I could find maybe an interview where she says her name, right? And that's a thing I do all the time. And in fact, I have my students do it when they're doing book talks. I say, make sure you've looked up the author's name so you pronounce it correctly. And at any rate, when I did, I found, gosh, Brad, tons and tons and tons of read alouds of this book where educators have read the whole book in entirety on YouTube and put it on there. And I don't have any way of knowing whether or not that educator has permission to do that, but I'm guessing probably not for a lot of them. And publishers have, you know, pretty important rules about works being shared in their entirety online, because it takes the people who make these books years to do it. I mean, you and I have written books. We know how much time it takes, right? So I just wanted to, for our 3.5 viewers, now there's half a person added, I just want to encourage people that I know that during this particular time where you're having to incorporate all new strategies to help get kids access to stories, and you want to make sure that kids have access to these beautiful books, that sometimes it feels okay to do things that maybe are stepping outside the traditional guidelines or whatever. I just want to encourage people to reach out to publishers, ask permission, do a little research and find out what the rules are related to this, because you want to make sure that these creators have the capacity and resources to be able to create more books. And when we don't pay them for their work, that makes it hard for them to make more for us. So we just want to make sure that that's true. I just want to encourage people to do that.
Thanks for that, Jen. I feel like we are a big time show now. We got an unofficial bumper, kind of, sort of. We're up to 3.5 viewers.
Yes.
And now we even got a PSA embedded in there. I will add, so I've checked in with other principals, just casually, you know, talking about books and stuff. And I think most of the time people just don't know. They're excited to help. They want to connect their readers to books and they want to innovate. And it just, like on a lot of the FaceTime read alouds and stuff, I'll just, you know, I have a great relationship with someone and I'll just mention it while we're talking about other stuff. And the reaction is usually, thank you so much. I didn't even think of that. So I appreciate the PSA because it is good to know. And if you see a lot of other people doing it, maybe they do have publisher permission, but it's always just good to double check.
Exactly. And I don't want to shame anybody. I think all that stuff comes from a good place. People are trying to do the best they can for kiddos, but you want to make sure that you are doing the very best you can. So now you know what the best practice is, and there's lots of people online to help. If you are on Twitter and ask those questions, there's lots of resources out there to help you find the answer to those questions. So
good stuff
that
as
being
always.
said, I know, so that this might be one of our longest shows ever, but if folks want to go back and watch our other shows and see all of the books we've recommended in the 2+ years that we've been doing this, where can they go, Brad?
We have got a smoking archive of books, list of titles and stuff, but also connected to the actual video if you actually want to see more about the actual book talks. But it's at bit.ly/read_this_now.
Woohoo! Thank you, my friend, and to everyone else. Happy reading. I'm gonna wave at the end of the Zoom meeting.
I'm gonna switch it up and salute. There we go.
I like it. All right. See you next time, everyone.